Welcome back. It is Bones. And in this one, let's go ahead and take a look at some custom work that I have done. Now, I will talk about the inspiration for this figure, quick little Batman variant that I made, talk about the ideas that helped me complete it and finish it off, couple of accessories I specifically made for him, and show you just how much fun it was to complete this Batman and add him to my custom collection. And I'm going to call this one Ultimate Batman 2000. Now, the reason for this is I had been looking at a lot of my collection of Batmans, and I noticed that they hadn't made a regular bat symbol, the black emblem, with a pouch utility belt that is done a little bit more in that tan leather color, like a realistic look. And so that started, to get my wheels turning of what I would use to make this custom. Now, this is an idea based off of, I remember collecting that Batman 2003 Mattel line. Now, I do have those up here on a shelf up here. And although not the best articulated figures, I remember them being my first line that I really collected all the variants and was really happy with some of the designs and the way the Batman was executed in its totality. I just really love that long eared look with the musculature, that thick utility belt, just always was eye catching to me. Really a fun kind of nostalgic thing for me. I'm not a big nostalgic person. There are certain things, of course, that I grew up with and I enjoy, but it's really rare that that will like control my impulses or anything like that. You're talking to somebody that really has no feelings to speak of. But that was my basis of what I thought this figure was going to come out to be. Now, there's also a comic line, a run that I think it was called Gotham Knights or something like that, but it was around the 2000 era, kind of where I started, drifting off of comics, not really actively collecting after the 2000s. But at this time, they also had a Batman that really started off with this look, which was a gray suit, black trim, the boots, the cowl, the thick utility belt, and a lot of times he would be seen teaming up with Superman. Now, that was just the jump off point. Of course, my real inspiration was that gray and black version of Batman from the superheroes line, the Select Scope. Now there was three versions of this, which I do have all of them: the blue and gray, the black and gray, and of course the murdered out black version of this Batman. And of course, I do own all of these. Just some of my favorite Batman figures in my collection. So I did want a jumping off point. Of course, there's been tons of Batmans released: the Hush Batman, the Year 2 Batman, the Three Jokers Batman. But I decided to really go with a more versatile buck, which is going to be the Dick Grayson as Batman. I've recently picked this one up, and I thought it was a good start for my 2000 version of Batman. Now, I had reviewed this one with the new Robin, and I picked one up to keep in package, and I just kept seeing him, when I would go to Walmart. So I went ahead and picked up an extra one for custom work, and that is how this all, culminated together to become my custom Batman figure. But this was the jump off point, where I was going to start. Now, I did run into a couple of little bumps in the road, and that was just certain things that did not work with this one, so I will talk about that. But yes, this was my base body, the Dick Grayson as Batman. Some things I didn't notice until I was already customizing it, some surprises, and yes, it was a lot of fun. to complete this little project. Now, let's go ahead and take a closer look at this guy. You may be surprised at the parts I ended up using. Kind of a lot of elbow grease I had to put in this, a lot of grinding. But once it is done, it is a beautiful looking Batman figure. Now, the easiest thing to start off at the top was the head sculpt. I did do a custom Val Kilmer Batman utilizing the body from the Batman and Robin, George Clooney body. So I did have that George Clooney head left over. And I loved the long ears. And if you kind of looked at it from far away, it was just a bland looking Batman, or, standard Batman head sculpt. But I knew that it would really scream Clooney at me every time I looked at it. So I knew I was going to have to modify it to make it my own. Now, the first thing I did, of course, was white out the pupils. Now, this is a touchy, little detail. You have to get it just right. Another thing is you do want to get kind of like a bead of white paint. That way it doesn't look flat or have the iris underneath it. You want to get a little bump, kind of like a little round base of paint that could dry and just look solid. Now, it took me a while, but after, a couple of tries, I did get it the way I really wanted it. And a little tip here, I did go back and hit it with a gloss sealer. I think it was just some regular Mod Podge. But what that did was kind of gave a thick lens over it, a thick little cover over it, giving it a more finished look and kind of distracting your eye a little bit away from the fact that, it has that cutout around the eyes. But honestly, when you look at it, you can't tell because of the starkness of the white. And I did add a little bit of matte inside that cutout just to blend it in a little bit so your eye wouldn't be distracted from anything. Now, the main thing I did to kind of separate it from the Clooney head sculpt is I repainted the flesh tone, the open part of the cowl. And what this did is the way McFarlane painted it, you could really tell like it looked like Clooney a lot. But once I repainted it with a matte flesh color, I added a little bit of a duller kind of brown to the lips. That really, for some reason, it just really differentiated it from the Clooney head sculpt. And I'm really happy with the way it came out. You can barely see Clooney in there anymore. The eyes, of course, really finish it off and just make it a standard kind of comic Batman head. So, really happy with that. Didn't have to modify the head or the neck peg or anything. And you still keep the whole articulation and range of motion. You could look down very well. You could look up really high, right to left. And of course, you could tilt his head for some characters. So I was really happy with it. Once I got it the way it would articulate and move around, and I knew it was basically the way I wanted it, I did tape off the mouth and tape off the eyes and give it a black matte spray. And that, for some reason, was another little detail that just kept getting further and further away from the original head sculpt. Now, of course, the cape, awesome cape, wired fabric cape. You can use it to pose it around, and it's very, very generous for figure photography. So we all know that came with the figure. A $20 figure with an awesome wired cape is just really hard to comprehend, but we got it from McFarlane. Now, I didn't have to change the arms or the body. I did pop off the upper torso and mod it to give them a little bit more of a waist crunch, but that's, didn't really change much on it. But going back to the arms, I never noticed that the Dick Grayson Batman didn't have the regular Batman gauntlets. So I had to start looking with gauntlets that I wanted to use. And I did want the three-pronged gauntlets, which are more comic accurate. And I happened to notice that there's tons of McFarlane ones, but a lot of them are not really in that three-prong style. Another thing I didn't want to use is I didn't want to use anything that had like a grain on it. So the Three Jokers Batman was out because it has that kind of leather grain on it, that texture. And I wanted just a smooth, comic style Gauntlet. What I ended up using, which I just had in my fodder box, was the original Batman 1000 arms. I popped off the gauntlets. Now, this is where I had to work a little bit, and that is that I had to bore out the gauntlets because once I popped off the ones from the Dick Grayson figure, the new gauntlets weren't going to slide on. You were going to have to grind down that arm peg to where it would be small enough and the gauntlets would be wide enough and they would slide on and they would look proportioned to the arms, and took me a lot of grinding, as I said, and putting it on and taking it off. But eventually I got it to where they would pop on and off and they looked pretty much in scale with the rest of the arms. Once I did that, heated it up, pushed it all the way in, and was able to glue it down right to where I wanted it to, right where I wanted it to end, like right at the end of the forearms. And I was really surprised that I was happy with it. I would have rather preferred like spiked gauntlet blades, but these kind of feathered ones really work as well. It didn't really bother me. Plus, they were kind of the only ones that fit on these arms and matched in its size. So that's something I had to go with. I did keep the original wrist joints from the Dick Grayson Batman. And the main reason I did that was to allow me to use a lot of the hands that are in McFarlane's wheelhouse now that we have to pick from because the peg is a little bit smaller, and have the ability to coincide with hands from different figures. So that was kind of like a no brainer to keep the sculpted out wrist joint from the original figure. Now, basically, the last thing I had to do, which after the gauntlets was kind of a relief, is I had to get the trunks with the belt, the thicker utility belt that I wanted. First thing I found out is that the trunks were glued on to like that undercarriage, between the legs that holds the trunks in place. It was really glued in there for some reason. McFarlane glued it this time and it was not coming out. As much as I heated it up, it would not pop out of there. So I ended up having to think, I'm just gonna have to use the original trunks that come with the figure, which okay, let's work with that. So then the belt, which I still have here from the Dick Grayson figure, it was really glued on to the trunks as well, and it would not come off. It took me a lot of poking and prodding to finally separate it from the trunks. Once I was done, I was pretty happy with it. Now I just had to find the belt that would fit around the waist of this Batman. And luckily enough, I've done tons of custom work with the Endless Winter Batman, and he has a pouch utility belt. I've used it before on another custom that I did, and luckily I had an extra one laying around, so I didn't have to order it or anything like that. Pried off that utility belt, trimmed off the excess to where it fit perfectly around the waist, and then I went ahead and glued it on to this custom Batman figure. Now you still retain articulation at the waist and you could still move them around to your pleasure. So retains articulation, great looking Batman, really fun custom little job that I did. So now I have what I wanted, which was a gray and black Batman with that old school grimy utility belt. The wired cloth cape is just an extra bonus for posing and displaying. I did a lot of figure photography. Now that takes me into the alternate hands, which we have a lot to choose from McFarlane, but of course, I do have the two open gripping hands that came with the Dick Grayson as Batman figure, which are very useful for holding weapons. I also kept these kind of man strangler hands, these grotesque hands, and these are just an added bonus that will also work with this figure. And I was really happy to use these sort of knuckle dusters that come with the Dick Grayson Batman. And while his are kind of a light blue to match the aura of Dick Grayson, I went ahead and repainted mine in glow in the dark green so that they could kind of be like kryptonite knuckle dusters for this Batman. Really cool. Like I said, they pop right onto the wrist. This is the same wrist joint, so added little feature for this Batman. These glow in the dark kryptonite knuckle dusters, which I could even use with other figures. Really wanted to, so that was awesome. Now, a surprise for me was I had these extra claw hands from Batman Beyond, and I know I did that Batman Beyond Ultimate Custom where I, had to buy extra Batman Beyond. So I have about 6 pairs of these clawed hands, and I really like the way they worked with this figure. It just really seemed to fit right. Now, I didn't decide on keeping them on him, full time, but for taking some pics and posing them, they did work well with him. So I will be holding on to these as well to use with this Batman figure. Kind of gave him a little bit of going back to the comics, like a dark feel to him, like a little bit of an edge to this Batman 2000. So really enjoyed those Batman Beyond hands working with this Batman custom. And finally, of course, I did make him one gesturing hand. This is really cool. Like when he's throwing the Batarang, you want to have this open hand on him. And it works really well with this custom Batman. And of course, you go into the gadgets now. You can pick, there's tons of Batarangs and grapnel guns that McFarlane has given us. I did go ahead and go with this silver scalloped Batarang from, I think, the Hush figures, but it works really well with this one. Looks cool. The brightness of the silver kind of gives it some pop against the really dark colors of this Batman. And I did use the old school Batman 1000 grapnel gun. Really worked well. It's not, all droopy the way it usually is. I do have one of these that has a bendy wire on, but this one really quick and, in a pinch, it worked really well. So looks cool with this grapnel gun. And of course, I have another grapnel gun that I made short just to give you different options when you're thinking of posing him and stuff like that. Now, he does look awesome with a lot of the Robins, with Tim Drake. It's just kind of holding off on that because what I wanted to match up with this Batman was that brand new Superman that I just reviewed, the gold label. I'm going to do another video showing you guys different sets of Batman and Superman together, the world's finest. But this one kind of fits perfectly with that new gold label Superman because they both have wired cloth capes and kind of a old school traditional style costume variation. So I think that's cool. Really happy to be done with this one. Maybe he will become my favorite new Batman in the collection, but he has a lot of competition. But anyways, you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.
They used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.